everyone. Welcome to A Cuppa with Jason. Hope you guys are doing well, that you're surviving some of this crazy weather that we're having. I guess this is a classic English autumn time. And so we embrace it. We bring out our nice warm cuppa and we just kind of settle down in the midst of it. And this morning, hopefully we can settle down into God's word as we are continuing through the minor prophets in the Old Testament. And we've gone through 10 of them now. This is the 11th one. And we are going to be looking at Zechariah. Zechariah, found in the Old Testament. It's the next to last book in the Old Testament. And it's similar to the book that we looked at last week, Haggai, in that it's speaking to people who have come back from being in exile to Jerusalem. Most of the prophets are talking to the people of Israel, saying if you don't obey, if you don't turn back to God, then you're going to be taken away into exile and punished. And now they've come back. And so what's interesting about Zechariah is that he actually talks more about salvation than he does about judgment. And he talks quite a bit about the future rather than the present. He does address the present, but it's interesting that Zechariah, only second to Isaiah, is the most quoted book in the New Testament, most quoted Old Testament prophet in the New Testament. There's some 54 passages in Zechariah that are used in some 67 different places in the New Testament. Now, the majority of those are in Revelation, which would make sense because there's a future aspect of what God's going to do. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning, is kind of looking at Zechariah. It's one of the longer books of the 12 minor prophets. But kind of to summarize really what it's saying, Zechariah is saying, listen, the temple had started to be rebuilt, right? The exiles had come back, and now they were going to the temple, or going to the promised land to rebuild the temple, and they had started to do that. But after about 20 years or so, the excitement had died down a little bit. There had been persecution because when the Jews came back, the other nations around them thought, well, wait a minute, are they now going to, rise up to power and kind of displace us? And so that persecution discouraged the people of God. And so this temple, which was always meant to represent the presence of God, the blessing and the favor of God, the foundation had been laid, but nothing else had really been done. And so prophets like Haggai and now Zechariah, who are probably contemporaries around the same time, preaching a similar message, are saying, keep going, because it has future implications. And that's where Zechariah comes into play. And so here's kind of our visual for the week, right? We try to take each book in the prophets here, the minor prophets, and give us something to kind of help us connect maybe what it means. And so I was given this several years ago in a men's group that I was a part of, where it was an intentional discipleship program. And it's this kind of relay stick. We would call it a baton or a relay stick that you use in a race. And in that type of race, you may have seen it in the Olympics, is that you usually have a team, and it's usually a team of 4 or so. And someone starts out and they're holding the relay stick and they're running with that stick. And as they go around the circle, they go around the track, then the goal is to hand it off to the next person, who then runs his bit of the race. He hands it off to the next person, or she hands it off to the next person to finish the race. And so the reason why I was giving this is very similar to the message of Zechariah. I was given this relay stick as a way of saying, now that you've been discipled, you now are supposed to disciple someone else. So you're running the race of discipleship, of following Jesus. We talked this past week in our Sunday service about the idea of a long obedience in the same direction. The idea of day in and day out following Jesus. Not the big events, not always the highs of a great kind of conference or something, but just the day in, day out, regular obedience that all of us are called to live. And so we are to do that. We are to run that race. And then along that way, as we're running the race, we spot somebody to whom we're going to pass discipleship onto, the truths of the scripture, the practices of spiritual discipline. We help someone understand what it means to follow Jesus as well, the day in, day out aspects of following Christ. And then we hand that off to that person, train them to do the exact same thing. That's actually how the church grew. It wasn't a model that grew by addition. It was a model that grew by multiplication. That everybody who was discipled then discipled someone else, who then discipled someone else, and the church began to grow in the first century in ways that the world really never had seen a movement grow before. Zechariah, way back in the Old Testament, is saying to the Jews, listen, the reason why you need to build the temple now, the reason why you need to continue in this obedience, listen, it's going to take a long time to build the temple. It's going to be a day in, day out process that sometimes you're not sure what sort of progress you have made, but you continue at it. You continue to follow the plan. You continue to be obedient. And when you follow that, and when you build that temple, the presence of God will be there. But all of that is a race. All of that, to use the analogy, is someone running with a relay stick. Because eventually what Zechariah says is that there will be one who comes to take the relay stick and says, I now am the presence of God in all of the church's life. I now am the presence of God in the world as well, through what we will then understand to be the Son of God and the Spirit of God. And so Zechariah does that. Zechariah encourages the nation of Israel to keep building the temple, to experience God's presence in the present, but laying that foundation, laying that expectation down to pass on God's presence so that future generations would experience the very walking and talking of God himself in the flesh. Zechariah does a great job of grounding us in the present, but pointing us towards the future. And I think that's where our application is today. I think when we think about Zechariah, we can look at the prophecies and the visions. There's 8 visions that happen in this book that help us understand where God's people are supposed to go. But when we think about the overall message, we think about really the overall application of Zechariah, I think we look to the relay stick. And we recognize Zechariah is trying to get us to understand here today, how do we pass on the presence of God? How do we take the baton, and how do we identify someone that's ahead of us in order to pass on God's truth, in order to help build that foundation that they then will carry on for that future generations would experience God as well. To me, all of us should be looking at that. If we call ourselves followers of God, should be looking at least, is who are we identifying as the people that we are going to disciple? Who are the people that we are identifying that we are going to invest in? And it's not so much investing everything that we know, but it's investing our presence, our life, so that they might experience the presence and life of Christ. That's what our goal is. That's really what the mission of our church is. When we look at our strapline and we say loving God and loving people, in some ways, that might be one of the easiest things to wrap our minds around, right? We understand that Christ gives us the great commandment to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We are to love him with everything we are and commit our lives to him. And then he says, listen, for the second part of that great commandment, really what you need to be doing is you should be loving others as you love yourself. You should be taking up your cross daily and serving other people. And so, yeah, we're to love God and we're to love people. But when we go from the great commandment to the great commission, and we recognize if we are loving God properly and loving our neighbors properly, loving people, then the natural outflow of that is going to be the fact that disciples are made. That's another thing Zechariah hits on. Zechariah is essentially saying, look, if you're taking care of what's happening outwardly in building the temple, that really is a reflection of where you are inwardly. You're trusting God. You're trusting that he will come back, that he will bring blessing, that he will right all the wrongs in the world, that he will heal the sick, and he will mend the lame. And so our outward actions are a reflection of the inward reality in our lives. If we're not making disciples, if we're not passing the stick on, then I'm not sure we believe that God is who he says he is, and he does what he promises he will do in our lives. If God is working within us, if God is transforming our very souls, then the natural outflowing of that is to be poured out to other people. That's why the Bible uses imagery. Zechariah uses imagery as well of fruit, that the fruit of our labor is expressed that where other people can enjoy. Just like a tree produces fruit, that is the effort that comes from what that tree does on a day in and day out basis. The fruit of Christian, the fruit for us is how are we giving and passing on the presence of God? How are we passing the stick? How are we giving the baton away for the next person in the race? So that's where Zechariah is. In fact, the name Zechariah even means the Lord remembers. And I think it's appropriate because we are to remember what God is not only promised to do for us, but we're to remember what we're supposed to do for him as well. So I hope you're encouraged by that. I hope that you get a chance to kind of go through some of Zechariah and read some of those passages in there where he talks about the Messiah. He talks about the one who is to come, constantly pointing us towards the future, pointing us and reminding us of what God is going to do. I think and I believe as a means of encouraging us to do the same thing, to look forward to who we are going to pass on our faith to. That's why it's important for us as a church to be invested in the next generation. It's important for us as a church to be invested in the families, the young families of our church. It's important for us within our family ministry to equip parents to be the primary teachers in their family, the primary spiritual leaders in their families. And so we should be praying for that. We should be praying for our families. We should be praying for our young children, for our youth as well, recognizing that they're the ones that we are to pass the baton on to. So I hope you guys are well again, and I hope you're encouraged by that. Spend some time in Zechariah this week. I know there's some Bible studies who are going through the minor prophets, and I would hope that as you read through those chapters in Zechariah and kind of get a big picture of it, that God might bring somebody to your mind who you're supposed to pass the baton on to pass the stick on to in your race. So until next time, we're gonna finish up the minor prophets next week, and then Cuppa is going to take a little bit of a break to put it in our 2020 terms. We're going to put Cuppa on a furlough for a few weeks, just to be able to get some rest and to kind of think about what we're going to do next in regards to this series. But until then, I hope you're well, and we look forward to hearing from you, seeing you, and we're praying for you. We love you, church, and until then, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.